Being triggered is the best way to bring conscious attention to an unconscious wound that currently exists inside of you. Being triggered is a really good thing, and your triggers are actually your friend. The reason why I say your triggers are your friend is because they're not actually out to get you or ruin your life or anything like that, but the underlying intent of them is to keep you safe. It's for survival. Self-sabotage, inner child wounds, emotional wounds, the pain of unmet needs, etc. All these patterns that go along with this are ways that your mind and your body and your emotions, your instinct, they're all working together to actually keep you alive, to keep you safe. So they're not out to get you. It's just that perhaps the way that they're acting in your present context isn't actually keeping you safe. It's leading to harm. It's leading to suffering. It's leading to a lot of unnecessary suffering. But in the past, a lot of these strategies helped you to survive, potentially as a child, right? Repressing the emotion helps when you're a child because, well, you don't have the capacity to actually fully process an emotion without a caregiver. So you're overwhelmed, your nervous system can't handle it, it's got to repress it. Right? It takes the least damaging way out, right? The choice between two evils, right? The lesser evil is the one that it takes out, right? The ideal situation is that it gets processed and regulated with a loving caregiver, but of course that's not always the case here on planet Earth. Things happen. So when you are triggered, it's easy to externalize your pain. And I'm not going to say that your external environment and the people around you and the work you do and all this stuff doesn't matter, because it really does a lot. It's something that has to be investigated and is going to be a reflection of the internal world, and your internal world is also going to reflect the external world, because there's not a real separation between these two. And it's important to recognize that the true cause of a lot of this kind of pain that I'm talking about in this video is not external. It's something that already exists inside of you, but you're unwilling to look at. And because we have that unwillingness to look at it, we externalize it. We project it onto this person, this situation, etc. When in actuality, if we want to have any real liberation from our unnecessary suffering, we have to turn our attention back towards the internal landscape, our internal experience, the feeling, the pure energy of it itself, the tensions in the body, our reactions. It's these things that actually need our conscious attention, because without that, they're going to repeat themselves. The subconscious mind is a pattern reenacting machine, essentially. It controls 95% of your behavior. All right, so what does this even mean? 95% of what you do is the same patterns over and over and over again that your subconscious mind has been conditioned with. And you don't even recognize that this is happening because your subconscious mind is so beautiful and so utterly magnificent. So great at doing its job. And once it's conditioned, the pattern replays itself over and over and over again, regardless of whether it's healthy or not. And the pattern was something at one point that helped you to survive, but might not help you in the present day, in your present context, in your relationship, for example, or in your work, or in your diet. And when you're triggered, essentially, now you get the opportunity to look at it. You get the opportunity to observe the pattern and actually start healing it, turning towards the pattern rather than avoiding and turning away. And when we externalize the cause of the pain over and over and over again to a person, something like this, we're going to just repeat this pattern. If the pain that we experience in our relationship, if we don't make a connection between that and our own way of relating to the relationship, our own inability to set boundaries maybe, our own lack of self-awareness in some area of life, if we don't make that connection, we're going to be stuck in that pattern over and over and over again. So essentially, when you're triggered, this is the most powerful opportunity to heal and embody yourself. The external situation is just mirroring a situation that initially wounded you. Right? So you have that initial experience where you're wounded. And now this external situation 20 years later is literally just mirroring that. Right? You don't get triggered by bananas or by a cactus or by a leaf falling off of a tree. You get triggered at very specific things, like feeling distance in a relationship, or when you're criticized, or when your not essentially getting something that you want, right? You're not getting what you want. You get angry, you start pushing for it, you get forceful about it. So at very specific things, you get triggered, right? So I really want you to recognize that. It's very niche things. And when you're triggered, because it's so unconscious, there's all sorts of things that this kind of shuts you down to, especially when you're just kind of full of a lot of these sort of unresolved needs, emotional baggage, etc., which is like very common, very, very, very common. The overwhelming majority of people on the planet are suffering from a lot of these kinds of problems. Right? Essentially, when we're stuck in this, we can't listen to our inner compass or intuition. We just straight up can't do that. It's too underneath the surface. Right? We're too reactive. We're too unconscious. We're not self-aware enough. We're not still enough. We're not present enough. We're not grounded. We're not attentive towards ourselves. We're always escaping the self. How can we listen to our intuition and our inner compass, right? It's inside the self, if we're always escaping the self, always trying to run away from it. We can't be deeply connected to ourselves. We can't actually feel in deep connection with ourselves. This prevents us from being authentic. This prevents us from being in our body. Again, all this points to connecting to the self, essentially, right? Authenticity, listening to your intuition, your own inner compass, being in the body. All this implies being connected and grounded in the self. And when you're always acting out of wounds, you're always escaping and avoiding yourself. So these are like running in the opposite directions. And you also can't see life clearly. You can't really see truth. Your mind is actually unable to make proper sense of reality when you're always acting out of wound and unmet needs, because it's always distorting things in order for you to, just get the things that you need to survive. You're always just asserting your will onto it, trying to kind of get some short-term gain, typically, right? Some sex, some feeling of security, some escape from sadness. And when you can't see life clearly, life is very unfulfilling. There's an element of fulfillment. There's an element of truth within human fulfillment. These go together. You can't be fulfilled and experience a very diluted, highly egocentric mind. So when you can't see life clearly, life is not exactly enjoyable, right? And I'm going to explain this just a little bit more. You can't see life clearly when you're always mad at it, frustrated, when you're resentful, when you're depressed, etc. All this kind of stuff is just distorting your perception, which doesn't mean that we, in order to see life clearly, remove all emotion, but it's an integration and a deep connection to all this stuff. So I want to talk about different kinds of triggers, and all this stuff is very connected. We have emotional triggers, psychological ones, subconscious ones, trauma-related ones, and identity or ego-related ones. Right? All this stuff is very intertwined and completely interconnected. So an emotional one is something like a disproportionate emotional response. A psychological one is when a hidden or unconscious and repressed memory or belief arises, and it's usually in connection to some kind of unresolved emotion. Right? Again, all this stuff is very connected. The subconscious component is that it's very deep-seated, it's deeply conditioned in us, and we're just simply not aware of it. Right? These unconscious fears that lead to the reaction before we're even aware of the underlying cause. Right? It's very mechanical, it's very robotic. The trauma is essentially, it's kind of just mirroring that initial wounding experience like I mentioned earlier. Right? There's that initial experience where we're wounded, and then something is mirroring that. Something about the experience now in the present day is mirroring that initial situation. And that's why doing this kind of inner work is so valuable, because you can actually begin to free yourself from a lot of this unnecessary baggage. And then the identity-related trigger. I think a good example of this one, I'm just going to go right to an example of it, is in a debate when people are debating ideas and their core beliefs are, kind of being questioned, and they start to get very heated, for example. Right? This is another good example of just being triggered. They're being triggered because their ego, their actual sense of who they are in the world, and their direction and their life vision, all this stuff, right? Your whole life revolves around your ego. All this stuff is being called into question. And that's a very sort of difficult thing to actually do because we're very attached to our beliefs and we don't really like to experience the anxiety and the uncertainty that comes when we let them go and all this stuff. So something related to the identity or ego is when some kind of situation begins to undermine our sense of who we are. And then that leads to a deep feeling of uncertainty. So I want to talk about this kind of stuff in everyday life. Intimate relationships are probably the absolute best one. And this is because we have our attachment system, right, in our intimate relationships. And a lot of our core wounds happened when we were very, very young. In fact, a lot of them were before we even had a memory, a conscious memory. Right, so let's say you're in a relationship, and when there's some distance in the relationship, you start to feel some anxiety. You feel a lot of worry about it. Right, where is this coming from? Right, maybe when you were 1 or 2 years old, before you had a conscious memory, you weren't getting the proper attention that you needed. You felt too distant from your mom, and this just left you feeling uncomfortable because an infant needs the connection, very direct connection from the caregiver, physical touch as well, in order to regulate emotions, to feel safe. They're absolutely dependent on the caregiver for every one of their needs. And without them, right, this is death. Their life is at risk, and they can detect that. They know that implicitly. So now when there's that separation, that sense of disconnect, right, that anxiety comes up again, that fear comes up again. This is just one example out of hundreds, if not thousands. But essentially, you can see this occurring within relationships of all kinds, between bosses and employees, of course, intimate, like I mentioned, parent and child, etc. A parent often passes on their wounds to their kid. Their kid just like bathes in the parent's unconscious. Work and professional life is another good one. The stress, the pressure, conflicts that arise with that. Feeling unrecognized in your work, your competence, your feeling of self-worth that you get from your career, all this kind of stuff is all going to be related to past experiences. Childhood and family dynamics, of course, like I mentioned, health and body image, social expectations and peer pressure, finances, loss and grief, personal boundaries, conflict and confrontation, and I'll leave it at that. Now I want to get on to acting from a place of wound, because it's very different to act from a place of wholeness or acting purely just from wound. These are very different experiences of life. One is more integrated, grounded, aware, clear, sharp, connected to oneself, to others, to being, to existence, to pure awareness, to consciousness. And the other is more disconnected. It's more unregulated. What I mean by unregulated here is that it's not able to feel safe. It's chasing things in order to escape the self. It's chaotic. So acting from wounds, what are some examples of this? Essentially, false desires based on escaping the self. This is a core sort of underlying dynamic when you're acting from wounds. You're desiring something that you don't actually deeply desire. It's coming from a wound, and then you're acting in alignment with that desire. So that involves people pleasing, right? And I'll just stay here for 1 second on people pleasing. There's pain that arises when you're people pleasing. There's pain that arises when you want to escape yourself and scroll on your phone all day and eat nothing but burgers and etc., right? You're just engaging in nonstop distractions and self-sabotage behaviors and mindless pleasure, right? It's not even real pleasure. It's actually just a painful experience. You don't feel good doing this kind of stuff. So you're kind of fooled into thinking that this is what you want, but it's really not what you want. It's a substitute for that unmet need, which can be connection or safety, etc. So validating, basically validation chasing, a lot of self-criticism, judgment, perfectionism, avoidance of intimacy, chasing status endlessly, overworking, overgiving, self-sabotage, overcompensating, addictions, and bad habits. Essentially, even way more than this, these are all ways of coping. Right? You're coping with the pain of that unmet need. And when you're not getting the need met, when you're not turning towards the pain directly, it just continues to throb. And when the pain arises and you avoid it, it actually throbs even more, but you're kind of numbing yourself to it. But deep down, you still sense that this is terrible, that this just does not actually feel good. Existing like this just does not feel, it doesn't feel alive, spontaneous, creative. This isn't what life is about. This isn't who I am. So everything here involves avoiding, escaping, and essentially not feeling the self, not giving awareness to the self. Let's talk about healing the wounds now. The core principle here is going to be awareness, right? So if acting out of wounds is basically trying to escape the self and eradicate the self entirely, right? Avoid it, just dismantle, blow it up. I don't want this thing anymore. Now we're kind of turning back towards learning to give attention to and embrace the self. Being able to actually have respect for the current state of ourself. Learning to meet ourselves exactly where we are in the present experience. We're moving in that direction. In the direction of very deep self-love. So self-awareness is going to be a key theme to all of these. The development of self-compassion, therapy and counseling, mindfulness. I talk about mindfulness quite a lot on this channel because it's so powerful, right? If you're able to just observe something, that already begins to change it. When you're bringing something to awareness, it already begins to change it. Observation is already changing the thing itself. Observation, awareness itself is healing. It's curative. So when you're, let's say, practicing mindfulness, you can recognize, right, what am I actually feeling? You can give it attention very directly rather than always trying to escape it. You can just right now in this present experience, fully give it the attention that it needs. Learning to just give these things attention. You're practicing your ability to attune to yourself, right? And this stuff typically takes time and help. And you got to read books. This is a messy process. This isn't going to, these deep changes won't happen in a week, in a month. It takes quite literally years in a lot of cases to experience deep changes, because a lot of these wounds, a lot of these patterns that you act out of, these are things that you've been ingrained with for a very, very long time. You've been doing this for a lot of time, right? But I don't really want these time periods that I'm mentioning to discourage you, because you can make a lot of significant changes quite fast, especially if you have access to some good resources, right? I offer one-to-one coaching, but you don't even need to do that, right? You can go on my book list. A lot of the books on there are very cheap. Buy them used, right? The therapy and healing section, go to it, buy those books. You can get some of those books for $10. Buy 3 of them, 4 of them, 5 of them. Read a bunch of them. Read all those 5-star books. Read, honestly, every book on the therapy and healing section. They're fantastic. The second you begin to read about this kind of stuff, you're practicing meditation, you're doing a lot of these things I'm talking about, over time, you feel more whole. You're getting your needs met. You feel more grounded. You feel safe just existing. You don't have to escape yourself. You feel safe and present in the moment. And you realize that this is very fulfilling. This is healing. This is resting. It just, the energy flows nicer. And when you do things, it comes from your intuition. It comes from your inner guidance system. It comes from intrinsic motivation. It comes from your own creativity, your curiosity, your sense of purpose, your sense of mastery, what you really care about. Healing the wounds. Let's go right back to it. Setting boundaries, really learning how to actually create boundaries so you can know yourself, protect yourself, and actually enjoy being yourself. So that things don't, take from you. Things aren't exploiting you, right? You get sensitive to exploitation and manipulation. Learning to forgive people, forgive yourself. Inner child work, right? I have, again, an amazing book right here, Healing the Child Within by Charles Whitfield, right? It's on my book list. Go check it out. Rewriting beliefs, because a lot of these wounds exist in relation to beliefs, right? A lot of these underlying feelings, there's a belief connected to them as well, right? And these really just go together. Self-care, I think that's another one. Learning to just rest when you need it. Learning to attune to your needs, right? Actual self-care, not just having a hot bath with some candles, right? That's nice. But actual deep self-care where it's like, what is my real need here? And then meeting it very directly. What does my body need to be well? What does my mind need to be well? Right? Going out into nature. Maybe I just need to take the day off and just go and rest in nature, right? There's a need we have to rest in nature, to just walk in it, to bask in it, to enjoy it, to reconnect to the planet. Expression, right? Actually expressing yourself, your actual creative energies. You need to create something that you actually love. This doesn't just have to be painting or writing or YouTube videos or music. This can be anything. Your life can be an expression of your own creativity. The way you parent can be creative. The way you make meals, the way you show up in your family, right? The amount of love you give them. These can all be expressions of creativity, right? Essentially, you're creating things that align with things like your core values, with the things you really actually care about. So using your creative abilities properly, rather than for destructive purposes. Supportive connections, right? Get the relationships that you need in your life. Get the people who can hold you accountable, that can be gentle with you as well, that can attune to you, they can listen to you. They're supportive of you. Being vulnerable, learning to actually drop your guard as well, because the wounds always activate this guardedness, and then this sort of tension, all this habit of being so protective and tense all the time. We express ourselves from there. We don't express ourselves from like the core of ourselves. We express ourselves just from this surface level tension and these defensive barriers. It doesn't actually feel very authentic. And next is energy work. Maybe breath work being a good example of that. Right? Something to get into the body and get the sensations moving and going. Right? Exercise is good. Feeding your body the proper fruits and vegetables and nutrients and minerals that it needs, because all this stuff is stored in the body. So if your body's a toxic and sick place and it's not getting its needs met, don't be surprised when it's hard to heal your psyche and your emotions. So everything here reinforces turning towards oneself. It's about non-avoidance and applying direct attention towards yourself, towards your needs, towards your pain as well, right? When there's pain that arises in the moment and you want to reach for your phone or watch some pornography or escape into X, Y, and Z, you learn that, oh, this is the pattern that I'm stuck in that's not serving me, that Lucas was talking about, and I have to, right in this moment, apply direct attention to this pain and let it throb. Let that pain hurt. Don't apply attention to get rid of it. Learn to meet it as though it was your own kid. Learn to meet it and take care of it. Right? It's these parts of you that are screaming for attention and for love and for care. Right? You're learning to feel the pain of the unmet needs and repressed emotion. You're learning to just meet it as it is and with actual care. And this heals it over time. Your attention towards it is stable, yet calm and loving and forgiving and understanding and connecting. So where are they in the body? Where is the pain existing? Is it in your heart space? Is it in your gut? Where do you actually feel the pain of the unmet need and unresolved emotions, etc.? Learn to give your attention to right there in the body. Again, all this stuff is stored deeply in the body. You have to get into the body. This is how it's going to heal. You're not going to heal if you're always fragmented and disconnected from the body. Your body is keeping the score. Right? Read Trauma in the Unbound Body by Judith Blackstone. It's a really good one. The work of Alexander Lowen and bioenergetics, very good as well. So give your attention to that region and allow it to soften up over time. Notice the constant tension in the body. Notice that you're always tense. This is the perfect manifestation of the ego. Your ego isn't just a psychological thing. It also manifests in the body because all this stuff is interconnected. Oh, it's always tense. It's always on guard. Your shoulders are raised. Your gut's clenched. Your heart feels numb or just closed and shut and contracted and tight. Your throat is tight as well. Right? There's like micro tensions that exist. There's gross tensions that are just like obvious, like a closed fist. And then there's like degrees of how deeply relaxed your body actually is. And you're learning to just relax it as much as possible, only tensing things when they're necessary. Right? It's not like all tension is bad under all conditions. Right? When you're working out or walking, you have to tense and untense muscles. But why is the tension there? Is it unresolved pain and emotions that you're just holding there? Right? Like these muscles are actually in a state of fight against each other, where they're just they're frozen in like this like stalemate, right? And each muscle is trying to like dislodge the other one, right? There's literally an inner conflict. Like this is a small scale manifestation of like inner conflict. And like this is like a small scale war that's going on here, right? You got one thing attacking another thing. Like your abs, for example, are they tense or are they open and loose? Is your gut open and loose? Right? Can you try to let go of control and just allow experience to unfold as it is? Or you got to be controlling everything in. You're tight and you're afraid and you got to know everything and predict everything and manipulate for a short-term goal. Right? What's the state that creates? So you're getting into your body and you're seeing what's driving all this tension. This is really about getting familiar with the pain as well. Again, if you're trying to like get rid of it, you're approaching this wrong, right? I mean, the desire to not want to be in pain is totally valid. But if you're approaching it, right, you're trying to heal and you're approaching with like this, I hate you, you want to remove it, this is actually not going to work. This way of relating to yourself is literally founded on self-hatred. You hate this part of yourself. But we're trying to move in the direction of self-acceptance, deep self-acceptance, regardless of the condition, regardless of whether it's sadness, grief, etc., an unresolved emotional pain or an unmet need, regardless of what it is, whether it's a high or a low, we're learning to meet experience exactly as it's at and not always need to disconnect and escape it. Right? So we're learning to befriend what we're experiencing rather than unconsciously hating and avoiding it. You're learning to open to life rather than close down. Open is like you're healing and you're kind of being able to see it clearly. A lot of the contractions and tensions and all this stuff is being relieved. And closing down is like this holding, grasping. It's ego. It's wound, etc. That's it for this video. If you're interested in working one-to-one with me, you can apply to do so. Link is in the pinned comment. Take it easy.